Hey everybody, it's Ryan Metzler here again, and today we're going to take a look at Nations, the dice game. This is a fairly new one, being put out by Asmodee in the United States, clearly named after Nations. An earlier release, a civilization game from Asmodee as well, on which you were building up a civilization, and you could have various leaders on different buildings, and you could, specialize in war, or you could do all types of different things. Nations, the dice game, boils that down into, well, a dice game. And so this is going to be a dice game for 1 to 4 players. I did not look at the solo version, so as usual, you're not going to get a solo version review out of me. But it is going to be very, very short. It's a 20 to maybe 40-minute game that you'll play very quickly by rolling dice, re-rolling dice, buying buildings with those dice, and using dice for, well, pretty much everything, be it food or war or whatever. So real quick, why don't we take a look at what you get inside of this box? We'll see how the game plays, and then we'll come back at the end and get my opinions on Nations, the dice game. So here you can see the components for Nations, the dice game, all set up for a 3-player game. There really would be no difference for a 4-player game, except for that we'll reveal more tiles on this on this track each round. You'll see there's a 4-player column. That's really the only difference between the 3- and 4-player games. There's also some minor differences in the 2-player game, but for the most part it will play the same. To set up the game, each round you're going to draw 1 event tile, and there are 3 of these event tiles, so this kind of changes how the round will play out in different games. You'll flip it over. This will tell you, at the end of the round, how many of these leaves you need, food basically, in order to score a victory point, and how many leftover swords, or war, or fight, or whatever you want to call it, you will need in order to score a victory point. So you'll want these on your dice by the end of the round, or on chits, in order to go ahead and get those points. Once we're done with this, we're going to set up the board for the round. And in order to set up the board for the round, we're basically going to flip over tiles from the age pile of this age, and there are 4 ages in the game. So we're going to use age 1, and we will fill this in. Now as we fill this in, we'll see that we have different types of tiles. Some of them will be buildings, like in brown here. Some of them will be wonders. Some of them will be colonies or areas that you can settle. Others might be advisors if we were to come across any, which doesn't appear we're going to right now. But if we scan through this, we'll see an advisor there, and let's place one out here just for an example for if somebody buys it. So now that we've got this filled in, the rest of these tiles won't be used in the game. We'll have 4 or 3 other piles to use in future rounds. Additionally, each player out here starts with some books or knowledge. This knowledge could potentially earn them victory points by the end of the round, and the first player starts with the least, whereas the last player starts with the most knowledge. Now, in order to play the game, at the beginning of the game, each player is going to get 5 dice, and this is shown by their buildings 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 dice. Each player will also have a nation board, and then they'll have 2 little tokens. One of these tokens is a reroll token, and one of the tokens is a permanent or semi-permanent money that they can spend every round. To start the round, each player is going to roll their dice. And on these dice, you're going to see various different types of symbols. You'll have the food symbol, you'll have a knowledge symbol to earn knowledge at the end of the round. There is a sword symbol, there is a stone symbol, and I think that covers all of them. It does. So let's say that this was our starting roll, and what we want to do on our turn is choose one of 3 possible actions. Those 3 possible actions are, we could go ahead and we could buy a tile. Now, tiles out on the board here are going to have costs. Each of these tiles has a cost associated, and it will be 1, 2, or 3 of something. The something is always going to be the icon that is right here on the left-hand side of the tile. So 1 money, money, or money. For 1 money, I can buy any of these tiles. However, the other cost it could be is swords. It could cost me 2 swords, for example, to buy this piece of land right here. Or 2 money, or 2 money, or 3 swords, or 3 money, or 3 money. Each of these different types of tiles will have a benefit. So you'll see that buying a building, for example, if I were to spend 1 money, let's say I spend that die by moving it onto my board, I can buy this building right here. I can buy the synagogue, and I can place it over any one of my buildings here. Maybe I place it over the temple. When I do so, I'm going to lose the die that's shown on that building because I'm covering it up. So it's gone now. And I can lose any 1 white die. That can even be a spent white die, which of course I would get rid of. When I do so, I'm going to get a yellow die, and I would roll it immediately and add it to my supply. And you'll see that these dice are better. The yellow ones have lots of money, the red ones lots of swords, the blue ones lots of stone and books on them. Instead of spending a die like I did, I could have used my token, and I'll get this token back every round, so it may be beneficial to spend it, but I wanted to get rid of a white die that I'd spent, which is why I spent my die instead of the token. So I would be done with my one action. It would go to the next players who would take their actions until it got back to me. Buying other types of tiles will get you various other things. For example, buying these provinces here will get me a new token. Could be a stone token, which I would use for building wonders later, and I'd place it in my reserve. Could be a money token. Whatever it is, I can always set it aside onto my thing and use it later for whatever purpose it might serve. Buying one of these, I forget what they're called now, but they're kind of like a leader. You would put them over onto the side of your board, and you can only have one of them, but they get you a token until you cover them up. So you can discard them later, lose the associated tokens, but place a new person there if you find a better leader there to put. So you're going to spend your money and tokens in order to try and buy these tiles. However, you have a different type of action available on your turn, and that could be re-rolling. So let's say you've decided that you'd really like to buy this tile up here, Babylon, but you have no swords, right? So you decide that you want to use your reroll by placing it on your board and pick up as many of your dice as you'd like and reroll them, trying to find some swords. Unfortunately, it didn't really work out in your benefit. You got 2 swords, not 3. But you could, on your next turn, buy this province right here because it costs 2 swords. So that would be your entire turn, re-rolling. So far your actions are buy a tile, re-roll. The third thing you can do is if you've purchased a wonder on a previous turn, for example, let's say I had purchased these pyramids at some point, it would be sitting on my board as an unbuilt wonder. Wonders, once they're purchased, must be built for the number of stone that you can see on the tile here. So for example, 2 stone in order to move this off. So instead of buying a tile or re-rolling, I can spend 2 stone if I have them, which I would of course have to have rolled on my dice at some point. I can spend those 2 stone by moving them onto my board in order to build this wonder. When I do so, I'm going to get the token that you see on it, so I would get a permanent money token for the rest of the game, and also at the end of the game, this will be worth 2 victory points. So that's going to be of benefit to me. So those are your 3 action possibilities. Buy a tile, go ahead and reroll if you have a reroll token, but only if you have a reroll token. And 3, go ahead and build a wonder that you've already purchased. If you don't want to or cannot do any of these things, you will pass and you will tap or, I guess, rotate your card to show that you have passed, and you'll get no more actions for that round. Once everyone has passed, it doesn't matter if these tiles are gone or whatever's happened, once everyone has passed, you're going to go ahead and you're going to move on to kind of maintenance phases. The first thing you'll do in a maintenance phase is you'll look and see how many players or how many books are left on all of the players' tiles, or dice. Could be tiles, could be dice. They will spend those in order to advance themselves on the knowledge track. This is done in last player first order. So in this case, red would have the chance in order to do this first. Sorry, green would have the chance to do this first because they're in last place in the books. So they would go ahead and spend their tokens first. And so if they had 1, they would move ahead 1 space and they would put this out here. Now, this is kind of irrelevant in my opinion because if people are tied for the same position, they don't score any points. And how you're going to score points for this is being ahead of other players. So for example, since red is ahead of the 2 other players, red would score 2 victory points, 1 for each player that they're ahead of. Green and yellow being on the same space would score no points because neither one of them is ahead of any players. But if green were 1 space further ahead, green would score 1 point because they're ahead of 1 player, yellow. After you're done with that, you're going to move on to famine, which is when you're going to score these leaves. So if you have 1 food, you would get 1 victory point, and this will change from round to round. However, I don't have any food as the green player, so I get no victory points. If other players did have food, they would go ahead and move their dice to their board and use that food in order to get the victory point. After we're done with that, we're going to move on to player order. And in player order, you're going to check and see how many swords everyone has left on their dice or on their tokens. Whoever has the most swords is going to become the first player, second most swords, second player, and third most swords, third player. And if there's a tie, the turn order will stay the same between the tied players. Finally, you're going to move on to war, and war is going to be a competition in swords, kind of. It's not really a competition, I guess. If you have 2 swords, you're going to get 1 victory point. Again, that could be between dice and tokens, which you would have to move to your board and spend them in order to get the victory point. Once we're done with this, we're going to clean up and start a new round. Clean up would involve removing all of the tiles from the board, setting those aside, removing the event tile, and then dealing out a new round of events, starting with round 2 for the second round. So we would choose one of our events and see that this time you need 2 food and 3 swords to get 2 victory points for each. And as we play out the tiles, you'll see that the tiles will get slightly better. So we now have a leader that gives you 2 rerolls, or we have different types of wonders, and some dice or some buildings that will give you 2 dice instead of 1. So you'll play on them in this way, going through 4 rounds, and at the end of 4 rounds, whoever has the most points from their wonders, buildings, and various other ways of accumulating throughout the game will be the winner. And there you have it. That is Nations, the dice game from Asmodee. As you might expect, this game is a boiled down, and by boiled down I mean really boiled down version of Nations. The concept of building a nation or a civilization is still there. And that is what I would say is the similarity. So if you're looking for Nations Light, this isn't really it. This is indeed a dice game using the Nations theme, and that's not really a problem, although I've seen games where this could be a problem. Dominant Species and Dominant Species, the card game, come to mind, for example. This feels enough like Nations, or at least the theme comes through enough like Nations, where I'm not disappointed they put the Nations name on it. In terms of gameplay, very, very light. And of course, you know that I tend to use this as a little bit of a slight to a game. I don't mean it as a slight in this case. It is very light. It's not something that I would normally play in my own gaming fare, but overall I think is a pretty well designed game. For a light dice game, it's very streamlined, it's very easy to play, which is always great. The number of choices that you have are usually pretty good. Sometimes it's a critical choice as to whether you want to re-roll a die and go for something better, or take something that maybe somebody else might need. And that's the key point of contention here in the game, is looking what other players might be able to buy, trying to figure out if you can use that as well or more than they can, or if simply taking it away from them is good enough for your advancement in the game. Of course, deciding whether you want to go for a lot of tokens and reuse those tokens repeatedly, which dice to remove from your pool, how you're going to get your victory points. Is it going to be through the events or through buying more tiles? There's a lot of decisions to be made. They are relatively simple decisions, but at least there's a multitude of them to be made each round. So I give it credit for that. In terms of a light game, I'd say that this is an enjoyable one. If you're a fan of dice games and you're a fan of that kind of luck factor with some mitigation, I think this is one that you might be interested in checking out. So overall, not really a game for myself, but one that I can definitely see the audience for. Definitely check it out if that sounds interesting to you. That is Nations, the dice game from Asmodee.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.